Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the IFPDA Foundation, I'd like to thank you all for coming to listen to this talk, which will be in conversation with Marie Watt, amazing artist whose show is currently on at the Print Center in New York. I'd also like to introduce, on behalf of the Foundation, and thank on behalf of the Foundation, Jordan Schnitzer, who's standing here. Jordan is an incredible patron of the print community. He's a great enabler. He's a major sponsor of the fair. He developed a passion for prints when he was young, and his collection now, which is housed in his family foundation, numbers over 22,000 prints. I think that's correct, isn't it, Jordan? Yeah. And it's through his foundation he loans to museums. He makes prints accessible to people who wouldn't otherwise be exposed to them. And for that, the print community is hugely, hugely grateful. And my own take is that Jordan, unlike many other collectors, he obviously engages very deeply with publishers and with dealers. But the difference with Jordan is he's very engaged with artists themselves. He has a real passion for prints. He loves working directly with artists. And I think that makes him exceptional amongst collectors within the print community. So I'd like to extend on behalf of the Foundation our sincere thanks to Jordan and introduce him to you. Thank you.
I have the wonderful job of introducing two heroes of mine. So going back for a minute and a half, growing up in Portland, when I went to first grade, my mother enrolled in the Portland Art Museum Art School, and then 3 years later opened the first contemporary art gallery in Portland, having artists from Seattle, Portland, Los Angeles, San Francisco. And while I started collecting prints in multiples of the New York School 25 years later when she turned the gallery over to an assistant, I always talk about across the country with the 180 exhibitions we've had at 120 museums, the importance of supporting local artists. In terms of local artists, who's now become an international artist, Marie Watt, I first started collecting her work in 2000 when she was one of the first artists at the Sitka Art Center Jordan Schnitzer Printmaker in Residence program. This is on the Oregon coast, small little town, and I had some friends there, and they wanted to start an art program for that coastal community. And they brought in a wonderful master printer, Julie DeMario, and they would bring in artists who had not done prints yet to have that magic collaboration that creates so much of the work we get to feast on outside. That's when I first met Marie Watt. But before that, I'd already heard about Tamarind. And June Wayne, who in Los Angeles decided she, instead of being an artist herself, would really work more at helping others become master printers. And she started Tamarind, located in Los Angeles. She was a director for years, another person, and then, on my right, Margie Devon, who was there for 38 years. And it's because of Tamarind, really. Persistence. It's because of Tamarind that had a key role in so many of the spectacular publishing houses, Gemini, so many across the country, ULE, others, and so forth. Now, one of the reasons I've loved works on paper, and I have 5,000 paintings and sculptures too, is the magic of the creative genius of an artist who could make prints themselves, but when they worked with people who are graduates of Tamarind and now so many other programs that have the time and the technological expertise to push that envelope. If you look at the work by Leonardo Drew that we have in our booth right there that Pace did, unbelievable to have that three-dimensional kind of work. So for all of us, I've always said whatever technique an artist wants to use to convey their message to us, how lucky we are. Now, Marie Watt is one of the most important artists working today. You know, growing up in the Northwest, like many of you, I went in first grade to the Portland Art Museum to see the Pacific Northwest Coast native work. And I never understood why we all didn't celebrate those who came before us thousands of years. And if you look at native art and the story and their approach and the ecosystem approach they took to the land and so forth, there's so many lessons that we all today need to further learn. But it's through her voice and her work, which I hope all of you get to come to the Print Center in New York to see, that helps us understand some anguishing times in our history. Just as in the future, people look back to our generation, I'm sure find things that we weren't as appropriate about in terms of their view then. But she has an amazing way that you'll hear in a few minutes of taking a number of traditional native themes and putting her own contemporary feel on it that just seduces us when you see the work to get into her heart and soul and mind. And then she takes us on this journey that is just a wonderful place for us to go to learn about ourselves, others, and how we need to come together and continue to build upon common values. So with that, thank you for having them all here. Marjorie?
Thank you, Jordan. Thanks. Can you guys hear me? Can you hear me okay? Yeah? We on?
I am, but I
I
tell I'm
can't
gonna
hear
have.
that it's on. Can you guys hear me? Yes, okay, great. Well, welcome to everybody. It is such a pleasure for me to be here I've been retired now for about 8 years, and so it's just been a really huge pleasure for me to be back here where I really belong. So welcome to all of you, and it's also a pleasure to be back at the Armory, and I have to recognize the huge effort of the IFPDA people who put on this show again 4 months later, and their Herculean efforts to do that. So thanks for inviting me. Thank you, Marie, for suggesting that I be here to do this. And I think what I'd like to do is, rather than me talk about the people who are here to join us, I would like to ask them to introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about their own histories and what they want you to know about them. So you want to start, Marie?
Sure. So, I'm Marie. I'm a member of the Seneca Nation, and I'm also German and Scottish. And I think I first fell in love with printmaking at Willamette University, and then in graduate school, wisely, chose my art study, for my work study job, I actually was in the print studio. And it was just a place that I really loved meeting other people and making work. And I'll just keep it at that. Julia.
My name is Julia DeMario, and I started my career as an etching printer at Robert Blackburn's printmaking workshop when it was down on 17th Street, and I have the utmost respect and appreciation of what Bob Blackburn did for so many artists and printers, and for me in particular. I wouldn't be where I am today without having had that experience at Bob Blackburn's. After 5.5 years there, I joined the team of printers at Pace Editions and had 17 unforgettable, amazing years there, working in conjunction with the other printers, Ruth Lingen, Bill Hall, Joe Wilfer, and learned a lot of my lasting skills working with those other printers and with the artists we were lucky enough to work with at Pace. And in 2008, I moved to California and have been traveling to print with Marie and others at the Sitka Center for Art and Ecology, which Jordan sort of already introduced my history there. I've been there since 2002, actually, and every year 2 to 3 artists are invited for 2-week residencies. Most of them have no prior print experience, and that is part of the mission. It's a teaching residency, as well as a chance for artists to make some editions that they can then sell and hopefully be bitten by the etching bug and continue on in printmaking, which Marie has done. We've collaborated 4 times since that first collaboration in 2002, and everyone has been unique and so satisfying, and I feel very lucky to know Marie, so that's me.
Hi, I'm Paul Mullowney, and I run a small print publishing studio in Portland, Oregon. I also started out as an etcher. I started my career at Crown Point Press. I had been working for a brief time at Saul Lewitt's studio in Brooklyn under Joe Watanabe, and when I went out to San Francisco, Joe says, you should check out Crown Point Press, and I'm like, okay. So I went in, and John Cage was on the radio, and I was driving around, and he said, he was in Berkeley on KPFA. He said, well, I'm working at Crown Point Press right now. I thought, I'm going to go check that out. And I went and just cold called, knocked on the door. Kathy Brown let me in. I said, do you need anyone to sweep the floors or anything? She said, well, we're looking for a printer. And she said, by the way, John Cage is here. And she opened the studio door. I'm like, oh, John Cage is here? I didn't know that. That's great. I started the following week, and I have been very fortunate to work with some of the top artists in the country that we all know, starting at Crown Point, and then most recently with Marie. And it's really a lot of fun.
Great. Thanks, guys. That's a good place to start. There actually is a chair available in front if anybody needs one. But I have been watching Marie's work grow and her career just absolutely blossom since we first met in 2001. That's a long time ago. And we were both a lot younger then, weren't we? Yeah. I met her at a conference at Crow Shadow, which was sponsored by Art 21, which was organized to kind of brainstorm about how to give Native artists a wider exposure. And that's where I met Marie, and I was just so enchanted by her and her work. And I went back to Tamarind thinking, okay, let's figure out a project that we can do that will involve her. And so we ended up putting a project together called Migrations. And Marie came to Tamarind for the first time in 2004. And then we had a catalog, and you can see that at her show, and worked with a number of artists. It's just been a pleasure in every way to work with her. And I think I would like to just dive right in. And, you know, it seems like for a lot of artists, making prints is a very different kind of experience from making paintings and sculptures. I feel like for you, it's not so different. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the role of prints in your artistic practice.
It's interesting. It wasn't until I was approached by Jordan Schnitzer and Derek Cartwright and John Murphy, specifically the latter two are from USD, and was invited to do a printmaking retrospective. I don't think I'd really ever deeply considered how integrated printmaking was to my practice and is to my practice. And and just one very simple example, a lot of my work is collaborative, and one of the ways I like to acknowledge people is by giving a print. And it started with this I'll call it a lowbrow machine that was called the GoCo printer. Some of you might remember that, a little silk screen unit. And then it has evolved now today. I've been working with Kathy Keene, who is also a colleague of Julia's at Pace Editions. She lives in Portland, and so using her Vandercook press, we're sort of continuing to make prints together and doing these pressure prints. And I think that for me, printmaking sometimes leads to new work, and sometimes work I'm working on leads to printmaking. I also just want to acknowledge Crow Shadow and where we first met, Marge, because I've similarly worked with Crow Shadow probably on 4 or 5 occasions. And really, this is this remarkable organization that was co-founded by Jim Lavador and another partner in the community. And it is a place where they invite Native artists and actually a bunch of different artists. It's not just solely Native artists, but like to come and make work. And they do traditional classes for the community, traditional arts classes for the community. And it's a place where everybody in Pendleton, as well as people from the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla, everybody is invited to be in this space. But for me, in that moment, in 2001, I was with people who were and remain legendary. It was Truman Lowe and Kay Walking Stick and James Luna and Edgar Heap of Birds. And in 2001, there wasn't probably almost a single publication devoted to the work of an Indigenous artist. And so for me to be in the room with these people, with these like towering heroes, was just sort of amazing. But the other thing you need to know about that experience for me is that it is like all the opportunities I feel like I've ever had began at that point. I met Marge there. And then I also met Truman Lowe, who curated me into my first solo exhibition in New York at the George Gustav High Museum, which is part of the National Museum of the American Indian. And the connective tissue just continues. And so it's a very special place. And I think one thing that I celebrate, and I think that technology allows for this a little more to happen, is there's so many things happening in all kinds of little pockets in the world, or as like Jordan was talking about earlier today with us, like blue pockets and red pockets. Like art is important everywhere, right? And like and figuring out how to bring art to all of our communities, and I'm gonna just say to break down. Maybe instead of talking about breaking down, just like opening up new pathways for conversations and understanding is so important.
Well, that's a good place to ask the printers about collaboration and what collaboration really means to both of you. We had a conversation about this earlier, and Paul said, I'm not even sure what does collaboration mean anymore. So tell us what you think it means. Or maybe we should let Julia talk about what it means.
Well, in certain shops, they don't consider what printers and master printers do collaboration per se. The printers are technicians who they serve the artist and really stand back without making aesthetic judgments. In our shop, we are much different. We bring a lot of different ideas from other shops, not better, but just different. And we don't make aesthetic decisions unless we're asked, but I feel what we do is a truly collaboration, sharing of labor. We're working with the artist. You can see Alejandra, our assistant there right now, pasting. I don't know, I've got my own take on it, but I would like to hear from Julia and Marie about how collaboration is so important to the work. I can't articulate it very well, I apologize.
Well, what first drew me to printmaking was the social aspect of a print shop. I do paint, and that's a solitary thing, but I gained so much energy from being in a print studio with other printers, all working together, putting their brains together to solve problems for artists. To me, it's a problem-solving job. I listen to an artist, and I sort of steer them into techniques I think will best suit what goal they're after in their work. You're right, we don't make aesthetic decisions, but definitely technical decisions. So in that sense, it is a collaboration, but because without the technical expertise, the artist wouldn't be able to realize the end goal. So I like to stand back. In fact, it's way above my pay grade to make aesthetic decisions, but definitely to steer an artist into a path that isn't a dead end. I'm constantly looking for the path to a successful print and not to a dead end with a technique that isn't working. So when we first worked in 2002, Marie was working with alabaster, and you had piles of alabaster dust in your studio, and you were making sculpture, these pillow shapes, because you were working on the sleep and sleeplessness project. So we came up with a very conceptual way of making a print, which I believe is in the show. I haven't actually seen it yet. I just got in last night. By stippling over and over and over again to create the illusion of a pile of alabaster dust. And to me, that's where the excitement is, to bring something, as you said before, you were working in that arena, and we brought that to the print shop. In other cases, for instance, with the soft grounds, it was sort of a parallel. You had started to make blanket pieces, and we brought those, that way of working of applique and collaging the fabric into the print studio. So it was a real give or take. So I don't know if that answers your question about what I think of collaboration, but that's how I see it.
Well, I'm not a printer myself, but I just remember watching when a new artist walked in the door at Tamarind, how the printers would look at that artist's work in other mediums and decide which materials to offer
Yeah.
to the artist
Right.
to use.
Right.
You know, and that makes a huge difference. And then they would make a little test stone with all these, and inevitably the test stone was like the best image they made
Yeah.
because they weren't worried about what they were going to do.
Yeah,
I find that at Sitka, we've often editioned the test plates in other collaborations as well over the 20 years. Artists are so attached to that first little print they make, and it's often a good print because, as you said, they're not self-conscious about messing up a piece of copper.
yeah.
Yeah.
I will point out, too, the nature of collaboration that Marie does with your printing circles. The prints that we have up now at the Print Center started out from your printing circles, your sewing circles. So there are many, many voices
Yes.
of people who come to those workshops. We take the material away, and then Marie assembles them, prints over them. So there's the voices of hundreds of people that I've never met, of course. That's really, really beautiful. And that's what collaboration is, too, is community.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I think that collaboration can be anything from sharing space with people, listening to their music. In a print studio, it's the smells of the ink and the different sounds and noises that are texture. And then I think just when you're also, as an artist, if I'm not in my home space to be in a new space, it just opens up possibilities. And, but there is, I think the other part of collaboration that we haven't talked about is just like this, like when I met you both, you were strangers. And now we are people who've collaborated many times. And like there's a friendship and we know how we can push each other, or we can just talk and scheme and think about where we want to take an idea. And it's one of the things that I really like most enjoy about being an artist. And it's funny because as an artist who works so much collaboratively in other ways, when I had the opportunity to think about printmaking, I realized how like maybe my earliest impulse for collaborating started in the print studio.
Yeah, I actually remember a conversation with Serge Lozingo many, many years ago. He was a printer at Gemini in the early days. And I remember Serge saying, yeah, we have to be able to finish each other's sentences. And that's kind of what it seems like. I think about printers from my perspective when I saw so many projects at Tamarind. Printers are really problem solvers in so many ways. And Marie brings an idea to the workshop, and then it's their job to make that happen. And one of the wonderful challenges I often talk about is one time when Kiki Smith was at Tamarind, she made this really beautiful robin singing, and she brought some glitter with her, and she put glitter on the print when we were proofing, right? So she had this little package of glitter, but we could never find the glitter again. We couldn't find the same kind of glitter, the same size and the same colors. So finally, after much ado, one of the printers found the right color glitter, but the pieces were too big. So what did the printers do? They put them in a coffee grinder.
And and then there was glitter all over the studio for a half a year after
And
that.
all over them. Yeah, we actually hid every print that had either gold leaf or
Yeah.
glitter on it. When the new artists came in, we hid
Right.
all of those.
Right. We're doing silver leaf now, thanks to you. And now everybody in our studio is doing silver leaf because we made the mistake of leaving Marie's prints on the wall. Like, oh, can we do silver leaf? No, that's probably not a good idea.
I will say that I mentioned Joe Wilfer, who was the artistic director at Spring Street Workshop when I first started in 1989. He instilled in me this like golden rule of never say no to an artist. It may not work, it may fail, but at least you've tried, and it could be a huge success. So I've kept that as my mantra: just never say no, just try it, and not be afraid to fail. And I think that's certainly one of my other long-term collaborations is with Jim Dine. I print with him in Walla Walla, where he has a print shop, and I collaborate with Ruth and Kathy there. And that motto has served us well because we never say no to Jim. We just try whatever he wants to do. And it's freeing as a printer because you're basically saying, this might fail and it's okay if it fails.
Yeah.
You know, it's much better than saying, no, in my experience, that ground isn't going to work on this. You know, you've got to do this first and then that. You just try it. And that's what keeps the job interesting after 40 years, right? I mean,
That is Kathleen Brown's philosophy too. That I
Yeah,
love.
yeah.
You never say no. You always say we'll try.
try, exactly.
Then the printers go in the back room where they're etching plates. They're like,
Well,
this
it's
is
not
not
going to
going to
work. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, but don't tell Richard Devencorn that.
Yeah.
Try it.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, those challenges are your life's blood, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, Marie, if you feel like working in different environments or working with different personalities, does that affect the work that you're making in any way?
Yes to both.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost, and it really is
wanna
that
talk about that a little?
simple. I don't know that it requires elaborating upon. I mean, there's really these relationships that you've built up over time, and so I'm excited to like figure out what Julia and I are going to do next that's different from what we did before, but that also takes some new things that we learned that we weren't able to push further. And so that's always really exciting. But there is like going to a new space that's really also fun and part of the secret sauce.
Yeah. Well, somebody talked a little bit earlier, and it's really true about the public aspect of making prints and how, I mean, it's one thing to be at Sitka just working with Julia. It's another thing to walk into a workshop where there are 10 people greeting you and looking over your shoulder all the time. So did you find a big difference in that respect? I mean, you're so social, and collaboration and the social environment is so important to you.
I mean, Julia and I worked at Smith at their print shop there, and I've also worked at Yale with Wingate Studio. And I think also I'm an educator at heart, so I mean I really love being in those spaces. I think the hard part is that it changes your focus, and it changes the speed in which you can get things done, which oftentimes, I mean, there's different ways of working with print studios too. In the case with Mullowney Printing in Portland, I can like go and make prints there, and they are very welcoming in a way where I can drop in or let them know in advance I'd like to come by. And that is very different from working with Julia. Typically, when you're at Crow's Shadow, Sitka, we've got 5 days or maybe 10 days. I do live in Portland. I also am a parent, right? So I'm trying to figure out how long I can be gone from my kids, when people are going to come and maybe join me if I'm on a residency, but it's a lot harder to juggle. And typically when you're at an educational institution, at Smith we had 3 days, at Yale we had 3 days. So it's like, how much can we get done in 3 days and be engaging with students and go into the print archives, and how can you get all of that stuff together? And it happens, and it's its own sort of magic. And I think that, for artists and for all creatives, sometimes having really hard deadlines is like helpful, and it makes you push your work to a certain place. And other times having this openness also can be really rewarding.
Yep.
I don't think the collaborative prints, and I'm just going to put a plug for this event, tomorrow, Saturday, from noon to 4, 1 to 5. We are doing a collaborative pressure print engagement. And there's a print that's been showing, there's a couple prints that if you come and participate, you will walk away with a print. But in that particular case, for the prints that I've done in folding in collaboratively made prints, the process needed time to gestate between each stage in the making process. And so if you go, if you go to the show and you see the works that looked like they're collaboratively this is another type of collaboration, right? The public collaboration, a collaboration with students. You can see a little bit more what I'm kind of referencing in the abstract. I apologize. As a visual person, it's very hard not to just say it like this.
Well,
Right.
I know that from very early days, one of the things that's really been important in your work is blankets and the role of community in your sewing circles. And I think you have done an amazing job of translating that tactile quality from, real blankets to your prints. And I wonder if you and the printers maybe can talk about that a little bit. Maybe that's kind of an abstract question, but I just, like those early prints you made with the sewing thing
Roulette.
that look like stitching and feel like stitching. And my own background is in fiber, and so I can relate so much to those prints in a tactile way. And I think you talked a little bit about feeling at some point like the role that woodcuts have played for you in that tactile.
Yeah, I mean, I started using reclaimed wood and sculpting with it, and that sort of led me at Crochetado to working with wood blocks and playing around with sewing wheel roulettes and as a mark making tool. And then I would say I really began experimenting with the fabric textures at Crochetado and with lithography, but I really am probably, I love what Julia and I have realized in that area with the soft ground technique. And I think I'll have Julia explain it a little bit more, but I will just share that it is so nuanced. Like when I was working with Wingate Studio on printing satin binding, it was, I could see how much there was a struggle, which I think that's the other thing, right?
Yeah.
Like it's a trial and error process, even with
Yeah.
making plates.
Yeah, oh, it is. And certainly with the way we did the blanket pieces where Marie made samplers. As you can see in some of these photos, they're collaged remnants from blankets that, the magic of a good soft ground, you just can roll that collaged fabric piece through the press on a soft grounded plate and pretty much get that texture transferred directly onto the plate, and it will bite in the acid bath. And then Marie went back in and darkened areas with aquatint or burnished away areas, and a lot of the text is either added with aquatint or burnished away into the soft ground with one of your favorite tools, the ball burnisher. And then, plates can be layered in the case of the sapling and flint piece, the diptych. And in that sense, it was an obvious soft ground and these pieces, because the weave of each different fabric that you used came through in a very unique way. And we just built upon that over the course of, I guess, 3 different groups of prints.
Yeah, and one of the things I've actually enjoyed about that process is it's kind of led me to this question about what is an artifact, because sometimes the fabric then gets, the fabric that we used to make the soft ground, that same composition gets incorporated into a textile piece with embroidery and other elements. And so there's the print.
And the plate's
There's
an artifact,
the
yeah.
Plates that is an artifact.
Yeah.
And then for myself as a Seneca person, I guess I'm also, that word for me is complicated, because a lot of the way that non-Native people know about Native people is through our artifacts, and that are oftentimes kind of presented in dark, austere spaces separated from the lives of our communities. And so there's this kind of history of misrepresentation with artifacts too, or maybe just very incomplete stories. And so that's something else that these processes make me think about.
Paul, I know you're also interested in the idea of artifact and the plates. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, I don't know if I can, but I'll remark on what Marie just
Okay.
said. Our most recent prints with you are photogravures of photographs from your jingle sculptures, which are their own artifact, correct?
Yes.
And then we've made gravure plates on copper and Marie collages, and then we started using calico cloth. So I think all the work we're doing is really pushing the boundaries of printmaking in America, and it reminds me of G's Ben's, that Fontaine Press, and I mean, we're not the only ones. It's really great to see this stuff, artifacts.
I think one of the
What am
other
I missing?
well, I think one of the things that we pondered recently in a conversation was just this Walter Benjamin article that many art students have read, that's art in the age of reproduction.
Yeah.
And I think that one thing that's also interesting about the word artifact is just where does the act of printmaking fall into that conversation? Because you have, and like what are the different types of prints that are made, and how does a layperson maybe understand the difference between a print that is 1,000 lithographs versus like a smaller unique edition of lithographs, or a newspaper print? How is it different from prints in this very hall, right?
Yeah. And what you're doing now with the new prints is also sewing back into them, and they have threads and loops. And I misspoke a second ago. I believe I meant to say Paulson Fontaine Press if I missed
That's
in
okay.
Berkeley.
Yep, that's changed.
So yeah.
Well, for me, the word artifact also implies histories. And I know that histories are something that are so important to you, Marie, in your work. And yesterday, when I went to see your show, I wanted to spend the whole day there looking at everyone's story on the pile of blankets. You want to talk a little bit about how you present that work and how that's important to you?
Well, one of the things that happened when I started working with blankets is I chose that material because of what it meant to me culturally as a Seneca person, and what blankets were to my family, which it's this object we give away to honor somebody for being witness to an important life event. And I quickly realized, as I was like looking for material at thrift stores, anything in the early days, it was anything $5 and under, and it was actually easy to acquire wool blankets because polar fleece was having a heyday, and so everybody was getting rid of their wool blankets for polar fleece. Now this is like we're living in a very different moment, correct?
Yeah.
But I mean, I could find these like old wool blankets, and they were everywhere. And I think I was struck by it, like how just for me these blankets were sort of like heirloom-like, and they had, stains and tears and mended parts, and they were all like a part of the blanket's story. And I quickly realized, as I started to kind of acquire or amass more of the blankets with the idea of building this very large, like 14-foot column or totem form, I would have friends over and they'd be like, oh, my grandmother used to have a blanket like this. And like they just started thinking about their grandmother and talking a lot. And I quickly realized that, blankets receive us, and they, like when we were born, a blanket literally is kind of what catches us. And then also, though, like we depart this world in a blanket, and we're imprinting on these objects in between those two bookends, right? And so, I mean, that's kind of where my interest in blankets and like really thinking about blanket stories started. And so my first installation, there was like a book out where people could share their blanket stories, and it was amazing. I felt like people were so generous in what they shared, and it was so personal. And so then I'm just listening to my materials, quite frankly, and the next thing I decided to do is to invite people to share a blanket and a blanket story, and in exchange for that contribution, I would give them a print. And one thing that was really amazing is that people could give a placeholder or, a blanket that wasn't the actual object, but oftentimes people gave the actual blanket. And I think that also says something to like how we are as humans and wanting to share our stories and wanting to share our histories. And so I think one of the things that happens then in these sculptures is that it becomes a story of a community. And so there's these blankets that have been contributed by community, but they're also giving us a picture of how we're all connected and related.
I'm wondering if one of the prints that you made at Tamarind, I'd like to shift a little bit and talk about your more recent prints, which have more text in them. And I'm wondering if what Marie did, one of her prints at Tamarind in 2007, maybe?
I can't remember if the Storywork blanket print, or they're called Blanket Story Book 1 and 2. I can't remember if those are in the exhibition or not, but they are one of the things that happened is that, so I received these books that were just full of these stories that people had contributed about blankets. And at Tamarind, I transcribed the stories in my own hand, which was a way of reading the stories and getting to know them. And I transcribed the stories by hand and then kind of created this warp and weft of text that then became these prints.
Which layering in prints allows you to do that you couldn't have really done in another medium.
Yes.
So,
yes.
I wonder, was that your first use of text in prints?
Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah.
I think it was, and it might have actually even been my first use of text in artwork in general. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, now, your more recent prints have a whole different kind of edge to them, starting with Marvin Gaye. And one of her prints is called What's Going On? And any of you who are anywhere close to my age will remember a song called What's Going On? Do you want to talk a little bit about that? And
yeah. I have been asking the question in my work for the last 4 or 5 years, I'm thinking the question is, what would the world look like if we considered ourselves companion species? And in a Seneca way, I consider myself related to animals. Our clans are passed down through our mothers. I'm from the Turtle clan. And this understanding of our relationship with animals starts with our creation story. And Sky Woman, she falls and/or is pushed from this hole in the sky. She is first helped by birds and then by animals, land, and start her new life on what we call Turtle Island. And so as a result of how the animals helped Sky Woman, we consider them our first teachers. And so I was thinking in a Western experience, what's our entry point to being related to animals? And I was thinking it's our pets. And I like to say I'm a cat person, but I decided to focus on dogs. And I started looking at dogs in art history. Sorry, Marge, you opened up a big, this question is like a snowball.
Good,
We'll
you
get
keep
there.
talking. How much more time do we have?
So anyway,
okay.
but basically what happened is I was looking at this image of the Capeltine wolf and as a canine reference, right? And all of a sudden I see this mother who is mothering, and it's not a human mother. They're mothering demigods. The demigods are pretty plump. She's emaciated. You see her ribs. She's a canopy and a shelter for these two rather plump children. She also is very tired. Her eyes have enormous bags under them, but she could become ferocious at a moment's notice. And I really I come from a matrilineal society, and I really start thinking about this word mother in a completely different way. And how do we all, everybody in this room, how do we all have characteristics and hold the responsibility of mothering, right? And so then that led to Marvin Gaye's song, What's Going On, coming on the airways, and he's calling out mother, mother. Well, there, I'm instantly thinking about wow, this call is not mother, mother, brother, brother, sister, sister. It includes grandmother, grandmother, and auntie, auntie, and uncle, uncle. It includes sky, and it includes water, and it includes turtle, and it includes deer and dog and cat. And so I started to think about how this is this intersection between Marvin Gaye knowledge and indigenous knowledge about our relatedness. And it continues to be a thread and through line in my work. The project that we will be collaborating on tomorrow at the Print Center has language that is still Marvin Gaye and indigenous related, but also really looks at New York and this state as an important place. I come from the Cattaraugus Reservation. Our family comes from the Cattaraugus Reservation, and so I really think of New York as another one of my homes. And so I'm very excited to work on that project with people tomorrow.
Great.
Yeah.
Good. So is it time for questions yet, or can we? What?
It does. Did you have one more question you wanted to ask, Marge? Or
Yeah, I do, because I'm interested in, I know how deeply rooted your native heritage is, but also prints, and especially prints with words, have historically always been used as a form of social protest. Do you see your work in that light in any way, or?
I don't know that.
I mean, kind of that Marvin Gaye song.
Yeah.
Was
It's
a
definitely
protest song from the early 70s.
It's definitely connected. I mean, one thing people should know is that song was written in the 70s. It was initially penned by Obie Benson. He was on a bus. He was going by People's Park in Berkeley. He saw this huge Vietnam War protest. There were thousands of people there.
I was there.
There are thousands of people there. This is also simultaneously, the American Indian movement is occupying Alcatraz. Dr. Martin Luther King has been assassinated. We have the civil rights movement. When I am starting to work with words in my work, and I'm thinking about this word mother and this intersection between Marvin Gaye language and indigenous language about how we're all related, it was really in the midst of the Flint water crisis and Standing Rock. And I'm thinking of students protesting for the environment. And there are so many things that connect us. I am very interested in how anybody's hand, when you cut paper and you write a word, that word is connected to your hand, and it's connected to your voice box, and it's connected to the cadence of language. And it's so I do see a connection. But I would say that I feel like I'm a small A activist, that's not necessarily, that's not what I lead with. And in fact, and I think that's always been sort of, I'm very concerned with social and political issues, but I also want to create inroads to having conversations that are important and not alienate people in those conversations, because I have a lot to learn.
Well, I think in single thing you do, your humanity, really shines through. And all of your work, has this tactile warmth to it. And I don't know, I was a fan in 2001, and I'm an even bigger fan now. And it's just been a pleasure to meet and chat with Julia and Paul, and have them share their insights into your work as well. Do not miss seeing Marie's show. It is fabulous. It's at the Print Center on 24th, is that right? And it will be there through May 18th. I hope everybody will join us tomorrow at the printing circle, which is sort of been transformed from the sewing circles, have now turned into a printing circle. And I think, Paul, you're going to be there and be involved in that project as well.
Thank you.
There also is a beautiful catalog. Thank you, Jordan, so much for publishing that catalog for Marie. It is at the Print Center's booth, A15, if you'd like to take a look at it. I was hoping we would have a copy so I could hold it up, but we don't. And it's been a pleasure having you all. I think we have time for some questions, if there are any from the audience.
Thanks a lot. I'm looking forward to tonight at the Print Center for the reception. A small little technical question. I noticed that you're left-handed.
Oh,
How did the fact that you're left-handed affect your early cutting with scissors that were made for right-handed people?
I'm left-handed too. That's so funny.
there you go.
You know what? My mom used to be a nurse, and we'd have these early kind of nursing scissors that I remember using. I think I just learned how. Are you left-handed as well? Honestly, I think I just learned how to like make the angle just right so you can use them, because I have tried left-handed scissors, and my success with them is like not so great. So, but I thought you were going to ask like, how do you draw on a plate? And Julia early on, figured out a way to make me a very nice bridge so I could get in there, because oftentimes I'm. Thank you for asking that question. Anybody else?
No more questions? I'd like to acknowledge Deb Cheney, who's in the audience, who's a printer who
Yes.
worked, I think, on your
Yay.
blanket
I worked
stories
with Deb at
project.
Tamarind.
And Diana Gaston, who is the current director of Tamarind. I think she's here somewhere. I'm giving you all an opportunity to think of another question. Okay.
Again, a non-technical question. In terms of indigenous art, I've been reading the work of Robin Wall Kilmer, braiding
Oh, yes.
sweetgrass
Yeah.
and moss. Is there any kind of communication between the two cultures? And, in terms of, she has brought up so many wonderful things about the indigenous culture and how we made a wrong turn and we're in this situation because of that. Have you read her books?
I have listened to them and yet not completed it, but I completely agree. She shares a lot of very important indigenous knowledge, not just from her own tribe's experience or her own tribe's practices, but from other communities as well. And it is an extraordinary work of literature, but like it's a great. It's like a toolbook, right? And it is really something that everyone should read and become familiar with.
Braiding wheatgrass, sweetgrass
yes.
is her most popular, but her earlier one, Gathering Moss,
Okay.
the whole world of moss, is fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you for plugging those books. I
Yeah.
agree.
Yes.
I was wondering if each of you could say a little bit about what keeps you excited about print.
should I start? The wonderful thing about being an etching printer for me is the vocabulary has been the same since I started in 1983, but every set of eyes and brain, every artist who comes into the print studio at Sitka brings a whole another bunch of challenges and opens up new ways of seeing those very same materials. So I feel like the luckiest person in the world. I have a job that is never boring, really. There are repetitive activities like editioning, and you have to go through a process. I'm very process oriented. I think someone once joked that I could have been on a factory line and I would have been happy because I like process. I like knowing what comes next. But being a printer, every collaboration, I will say, is different because of the ideas the unique artists bring into the studio. So
Wonderful.
yeah.
Well, events like this really excite me because we're kind of this group of geeks who have this language that when we go out onto Park Avenue, no one will know what we're talking about. The connection to the traditions in this digital world for me is very, very important. I often tell my students, and Alejandra, who used to work for me, has heard this a million times, but Goya could walk into our studio or Degas or anyone, but I always mention Goya because I'm an etcher, and he would know exactly what we're doing, and he would tell us that we're probably doing it wrong. I mean, 400 years of tradition that also connects us to the Native Americans and monoprints on the cave walls, and and it's just really exciting and important to keep those traditions alive, and the democratic nature of printmaking, which in this day and age is very, very important. Getting the word on the street through letterpress, wheat pasting, posters, social justice. That's as important to me as publishing artists too, is trying to make our presses accessible to younger people who can really take it and do interesting and important stuff with it. Nothing else does that. I shouldn't say nothing else. It's a big part of
It is
what
a
we
big
do.
part, yeah.
And it can't happen digitally all the time. These platforms we're using right now and we take advantage, for granted, will not be around in another 100 years, but we'll still be able to make marks on metal and stone and somehow get an image off of it.
Right, well, that's what Tamarind's for. Our mission is to preserve the art, the
traditional
fine art of
techniques, yeah.
fine lithography.
Yeah.
So, Marie, do you have anything to say about that? It's such a seamless part of your work, so.
Yeah, and I see James Pettingill back there, so of Wingate Studio. So, I mean, I feel like being an artist, of course, just like being a printer, like being a human, it's a lot of hard work. But like these relationships are it's like kind of part of why I love this job. I get to meet really interesting people, and in our conversations I grow, and my work is constantly changed by those conversations. And I love being like, I think that's what I love about printmaking. It's what I love about collaborating. I don't think any of the work could exist without all of the people that I come into contact with or that I meet. And I'm really, I mean, that's kind of the story that I'm most interested in.
Well, I think, all of the printers out there are making it possible for people who don't want to learn the technical parts of it. I know Marie actually started learning them, but all of these beautiful, what did Motherwell said, what earthy and exquisite people these printers are, something like that. I'm not sure I have that exactly right, but who make it possible. The way I always used to explain it was that, people would come into Tamarind and they'd say, well, why does an artist even want to make a print? And I'm sure we've all gotten this question. Well, it's like speaking another language, right, is what I would say to them. And these are the people who make speaking in that other language possible. So thank you for making the work that we're all seeing here available and accessible.